All right, so let's talk about the Division Year 5 and what I guess that means for the game, or what it could mean going forward. And maybe, there's a future for the Division 2. So obviously, I want to kind of clear the air. I think I'm obviously not the most positive Division 2 YouTuber around. I think we all know this. I would put myself in the more, realistic category. Maybe I'm a bit pessimistic about the game. But that's, of course, because my opinion has been formed through just the performance of the dev teams, going from the 2013 E3 trailer to Division 1, and then from Division 1 to Division 2, and of course the aftermath of what happens when the majority of the developer team leaves the game for a different project, and kind of the support for the Division and Division 2 just dies because there's no one working on the game, and this is supposed to be presented as a live service, and kind of it falls apart, and players kind of just get jaded with the whole thing because we're just kind of sick of this cycle over and over again, where there's a little bit of support and then nothing for months, weeks, years at a time, whatever. And of course we just kind of get annoyed with that. However, when it comes to the actual Division, I think right now I'm giving them still a bit of a pass. I said this when it got announced that the Division was reforming the team and they were going to start making new content again. I said this because I know, you end production, as we saw, Fei Lao mission was February of 2021. That means that, this manhunt started in, the end of 2020. So what did that mean for the game? Well, basically, most of the production team, pretty much everyone involved in the game, left after Warlords of New York, and then a lot of the mop-up crew left after the whole Fei Lao thing was done. So it was basically just kind of like a small live team that was keeping the game alive. And what that meant for the entire situation was that as soon as they were basically done in 2020 with the whole manhunt thing, they stopped developing anything, right? So that potentially means that the team had been not doing anything for maybe a half a year, who knows. And obviously when you're in a development cycle or you're developing content, stuff like that, it's next thing after next thing after next thing. You basically kind of try to churn it out, and your people are constantly working on this stuff. But if you have a gap where no one's working on anything, then of course it takes a long time to start making something and then pushing new content out. And of course, we found out that, they didn't even start, reforming the team until after, Ubisoft kind of came out with their, I think there was their yearly review, or, whatever, their earnings call or something like that. And they started saying that they're going to make more Division 2 content. And that was in February of 2021. You're not going to have a lot of content if your team stops working on content, and then you have to make a new team. And of course, this is one of the reasons why I gave a kind of a pass to Yannick and all the new team stuff, because I know that it's going to take time for them to make content. Because of this, I think that, right now in year 5, we're finally seeing the team's work actually coming into fruition. Because again, it takes at least a year to get this stuff off the ground. And of course, who knows how long it actually takes them to get people trained up on the mechanics, or the different coding of the game. So yeah, there's a bit of leeway there, and I am hoping that Division Year 5 is actually really good. Again, I am still pessimistic on it, realistic to what they can actually accomplish, and how good is it actually going to be. Is it going to meet all of our criteria, all of our requirements? I mean, that's still in doubt, right? I mean, until they actually show us everything that we're going to get, until they actually release this stuff, it's kind of well, prove that I'm wrong, that it's not going to be terrible, right? So we want them to prove that this is going to be good content, and I really hope it is. But at the same time, I am cautious that it's probably not going to meet all of our expectations or all of our hopes, and is not probably going to fix every single thing that we have been desiring for the game to be improved upon. But there is a lot of interesting tidbits. You can kind of paint your own picture based on some information. For example, Rogue Gold, he did an interview just recently with Morton Ryberg, and that was actually a pretty good video. Now obviously I want specific answers and I want, nitty gritty details, which, it doesn't matter what Rogue asks because, well, Morton's only going to say what he can say or what they're ready to talk about, and that's not a whole bunch. Now you can kind of do some reading between the lines and kind of infer what kind of, I guess, improvements or what kind of direction they're going. But again, we don't know for sure yet, and I do have my suspicions about what could possibly be coming, and I do have my hopes about what they are doing. But again, I don't want to get ahead of myself too much and kind of wish the world on the game only to be disappointed, because I think that's one of the biggest problems is when players start overthinking it and they start kind of wishing it into the world before it even happens, and that doesn't happen, then it's not the developer's fault because they didn't say anything, but it's your fault because you were assuming that something was going to happen when it wasn't. And another shout out is to the Gaming Brigade, which is Sergeant Graybeard. He actually showed, I guess, one of his videos recently was covering this article from Yannick. This is over at godisageek.com. Now, the main thing with this article that I found interesting was basically at the end. The question was, the Division 2 has struggled now and then with the gear system. Will you be making any significant changes to gear level and loot economy? What Yannick ended up saying was, with Seasons 2.0, we plan to add a new item type. In other words, we'll be reshuffling the gear by creating new items that you'll be chasing, and these new items will have different offerings compared to the gear that you already have. Now, I have my own ideas about what this could mean, but again, that's kind of a topic for a different video because, it's more of a speculation kind of thing. But, when you combine the interview from Rogue Gold and this article that I learned about from Sergeant Graybeard, then, you can kind of start to form some ideas of what we might be expecting. And, obviously, the Division needs something to reinvigorate the play base. I mean, obviously Steam isn't the greatest source for player activity, and that's mostly because Steam obviously didn't start, having the game until the beginning of this year. So anyone who's really interested in playing the Division has already played it, right? They've already have it on different systems or different, sites or whatever, like the Ubisoft Direct or whatever the heck that thing's called. And of course, Xbox, PlayStation. So not many players went out and got it on Steam just because it came out on Steam. And, you generally get a smaller player base. Obviously, it's, 4 years after the game released. So, yeah, you're going to see a much smaller player base on the game. But it's still interesting to see that, it has dropped as far as it's dropped, considering, this is a game that has been supported, quote unquote supported, for 4 years, right? So there's bunches and bunches of content out there to go through. And the average player isn't going to get through all of that content in a very short amount of time. But we still see that, the actual player activity died pretty quickly. I mean, it's at, roughly maybe 20% of what it was when it came out. And while that's not the most disastrous decrease in player base that we've seen, I think like Division 1 dropped like 90% of its player base in the first month. And Division 2, I think, had a very similar cycle, even though there's no real data on it. But, you can kind of speculate based on what they said after the game got launched, right? Judging by the sales and everything, that it wasn't a very spectacular or impressive reception by the community. So, yes, the game needs something to reinvigorate the player base. It needs something to draw new players in. It needs something to bring back lapsed players. And the best way to do that is through some serious and interesting additions or changes to the game. You're not going to get that by adding just, a throwaway mode like Descent. Now I know they're trying to add some caches and some XP to it and stuff like that. But, at its core, it's not part of the real Division game. And I think a lot of players are going to treat it as such. It might be a fun mode, and there might be a small amount who absolutely love the mode and think it's one of the best things the Division's ever done. Similar to, Survival, where there's a very small portion of the player base who thinks this is the best content in Division 1, right? There are plenty of YouTubers who talk about Survival mode as being the best thing in Division 1. And for the majority of the player base, it's not. It's an opinion that, people have that Survival is great. And generally speaking, if you look at the people who love Division 1 Survival, a lot of them kind of fall into the the DPS only crowd, or the mostly DPS crowd. A lot of them have PvP leaning tendencies because they did survival PvP and that kind of thing. Whereas a lot of the PvE crowd, they kind of got bored with survival really quickly. And since Descent isn't going to be PvP based, you're not going to see many players who want anything to do with like, if you're all like Dark Zone, that's the whole thing you want to play in the game, Dark Zone or Skirmish, or Last Stand from Division 1, that kind of stuff. You're not going to have really any interest in Descent. And if you're mostly one of these like loot farming legendary raid kind of people from Division 2, you're probably again not going to have too much interest in Descent. So again, it's going to be a very niche offering for most players. So for the majority of the Division 2 player base, I think, the real interesting things kind of come out a little bit later into year 5. There's the castle rebuild and of course, the current story with, the White House and the Black Tusk. We don't know exactly what's going to go on. So, I mean, like, there's some story intrigue with the game. But again, that's not terribly important to a lot of people who like the game. It's more about the looting, the building, the diversity, that kind of stuff, just trying out something new over and over again, because you don't really care about the story after the first time you do it. It's one and done, and then it's not exciting anymore, and you're just kind of going through the motions of playing a looter shooter, right? So Season 2 is going to be when we have the Incursion, which I think is, if they do a good job and it's not, in the same style of an immobile vehicle, which I've constantly, critiqued in the past. Yeah, as long as they have something that's interesting and some good mechanics in the Incursion, I think that'll be great for a lot of people in the player base. It'll be great for PvE because, not many players want to necessarily do 8-man raids. It's generally speaking a much smaller community in the PvE realm for raids. Yeah, sure, some people, they'll tag along or they'll happen to do a raid, but they're not hardcore raiders. And I think the Incursions are just more accessible for people who are looking to do more endgame style PvE stuff that's not just legendary content. Right, then, of course, Season 3, we're going to end up going back to New York. Now, we don't know exactly what that entails, if they're going to add anything really new there besides just kind of general season stuff. We'll have to wait and see. But I think, again, the big thing is coming at the end with Season 4, Black Diamond, and that's the quote-unquote story DLC, which we don't know too much about. And, of course, that's also going to be bringing the Seasons 2.0, which, again, we don't know much about. Now, the seasons, they seem like they're going to be an interesting thing. Obviously, I don't like the seasons as they are. If you listen to that interview with Morten Ryberg, like I talked about with Roll Gold, the thing with seasons, Morten said that, players are constantly asking, like the big 3 things are story, missions, and I forget the other, other thing that's on his bucket list. But stories and missions and stuff like that are basically the biggest things that players want in the game. And one thing that he kind of said that annoyed me a little bit was he said, well, the seasons bring 5 missions every time, and I'm just thinking to myself, like, okay, it's kind of a mission, but it's kind of not, right? I mean, if you're considering it a mission, it's almost deceitful to your community, because look, it's the same level, with the same, more or less layout of the enemies. Yeah, they do some changes. Mostly the fact that it's just a mission cut short. It's like you get halfway through the mission, and now there's the boss. So like, Okay, that's not really a mission. Um, you have a little bit of extra story in there, but I mean, come on, how many times can we keep having people reusing the same locations that already got, attacked and invaded? It's like they didn't learn their lesson the first time. Like the manhunt for some reason is just in this random location, but they didn't learn from the 8 other times that there was somebody in this location that it's not a good place to be. I don't know. It's like it messes with your head more than anything, and I don't really consider it a mission. I don't really consider it additional content. I consider it stringing along the player base. So in that regard to Morton Ryberg's comment that, they add 5 missions with every season, I kind of find it to be disingenuous, to be honest. And that's because I don't see it as real content. I see it as a reframing of current content in I wouldn't even call it a fresh way, because most of the time I don't really feel like it's a fresh thing. Sometimes they add something unique, like they added the flame turret. I think it was like the first season had that fire turret in Roosevelt Island. That was the thing. And then, like this last season they had the fire warhound. Like I get that they're saying they're doing stuff, and yes, behind the scenes they have to code the mission a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, it's a reuse of assets with maybe some, reskinning of certain objectives, that kind of stuff. And that's not what I would consider to be a mission, right? That is not something that is constantly going to be replayed by the player base. Look, you look at the missions that are in game and how many times players have played that over and over and over again. Even if it's boring as heck and you don't want to do it again, you still end up doing it. And that's something I think powerful in the missions, because it's something to do and something to just at least keep you entertained for a while. Whereas the seasoned content is specifically like, okay, I'm just doing the same thing that I've kind of already done under a slightly new skin. And it's not really going to be that different or that exciting, but they say it's a different event, and so whatever. That's kind of generally how I loosely describe my feelings on the season missions, right? So we do need real additional content. We do need map expansions, and that is looking like what, Season 4 of Black Diamond with the story DLC and Seasons 2.0 is kind of going to offer. A new kind of take on everything that really wasn't satisfying to most of the players currently. And of course, again, you look at the previous added content where it's disjointed from the actual map. It's a completely new location. You literally fast travel to it, and there's nothing to really explore, nothing to really do. It's just a mission, right? And that's kind of the thing. Players like the added world because it can bring in other things. You have to fill it with stuff. So the world, just seeing a new location with, unique things to find, that's fun. Maybe there's, hidden secrets or something there that they've added that are fun. Maybe there's, like new hunter locations or new puzzles or new loot boxes to grab or whatnot, new control points, who knows? But it comes with a whole host of new things that gets added to the game, which is why Warlords of New York was so popular, because it added this massive expansion to the game. Seasons, in their current form don't do that. So I do hope that the story DLC is actually going to be good. And I hope that the Seasons 2.0, changes that they're making are going to be also good. Of course, this is all going to be strung along, for almost a year until we really get into the meat and potatoes of this content, which is going to be a bit of a downer. Now, I mean, we've wanted content for multiple years now. We've wanted map expansion for multiple years now, and we're basically going to be waiting for another year for this content because of obviously, the downtime between creating the new team and getting them, proficient in Snowdrop, and of course, actually creating the content. Yeah, it's caused a huge delay in the ability for them to pump out stuff. But I would really be interested, like my final thoughts on this are, while on the surface, you could be really negative about this or you could be really positive about this. Realistically, I think that it's going to be, they were adding some stuff, but it really comes down to the details of, once we get closer, what is the stuff actually going to be? We already know Descent mode. It's meh. for a lot of players. Some people are really interested in it. Some people think it's going to be fun, but a lot of players are also not interested in it, right? So we've got the incursion. We really need to see, it needs to prove itself because it needs to be good mechanics, good fights, and not just, dumb kind of like sterilized assets. I don't want it to just be cleaner. Like literally go in there and it's just like there's a rush wave of cleaners, and then there's a building like in the back that you need to enter, clear through, and then behind that building there's a vehicle like let's just say it's like a big garbage truck that doesn't move and throws trash at you. I don't know. Like if that was the incursion boss, like, oh, that's a face palm. Like that is stupid. Like just let's add something new, something interesting, something fun, have some, mechanics that aren't necessarily like whole team dependent, right? Like that's one of the big things I hate about the raid, where it's like if everyone's not on point doing exactly what they need to, you're going to fail. Like that's a little bit annoying. I do like where there can actually be like, plays made by a player that saves the team, or something that a single player can do that can affect the outcome in a very positive manner, even if other people mess up a little bit or something. Something that's not completely just like, oh, you didn't hit the timing on this exactly, fail. Yeah. I don't want that kind of style. Hopefully there's some new mechanics where maybe they bring back carrying boxes. That would be cool. I know it's probably not one of the favorite things from Division 1, but the fact that they just kind of like took out some of the mechanics from Division 1 that were designed to be there for specific reasons, like defending the person carrying the box like in Clear Sky, or defending the hostages from Stolen Signal, planting the explosive from Falcon Lost, or hitting the data pad or the control panel in Dragon's Nest, like progressing through the actual fight in kind of like a realistic manner that, if you messed it up once, you're not going to fail. You just have to do it again, right? You have to like figure it out. You can recover from those situations. That's kind of what I like about incursions more than raids. But yeah, we have to see what the story DLC includes, what the Seasons 2.0 is going to be, what kind of changes they're going to make to fix some of the current problems in the game. I would most notably say stuff like, just excessive amounts of gear, which don't seem to be improving because they're adding new brand sets and gear sets and weapons and stuff like that, and they're not going to be changing, like the stash size. So that's an issue that we need to, I guess, have, some look at, right? And then, another big issue is just the progression systems in the game. Let's face it, Shade, where, you've got people over like 100,000 Shade, and you've got people with like 4 million health. Look, that's not great for the game. And, PvE, it's not great. PvP especially, it ruins it, right? So that needs to be fixed. And it needs to be fixed not just for current players, but for new players. I mean, imagine, like one of the reasons I won't go back to Destiny is because like I played, the first year. The free like season content that they came out with, like if you bought the season pass for Destiny 2, you got like the free, whatever DLCs that they had for the year of DLC. And like those DLCs were just terrible. They were awful. The game itself wasn't better than Division, or the game itself was not better than Destiny 1. Destiny 2 was not better than Destiny 1. And at launch, it was just a debacle. It wasn't as great. And that kind of, they started to change that around once they started making, they revamped a bunch of stuff. But now that they've revamped a bunch of stuff, you go back into the game and it's nothing like, you originally had. You're looking at your gear that you still have from your, first year, and you're kind of like, what the heck? Like, what am I using? What am I looking at? I don't even know what's going on here. There's a huge learning curve now, and I don't want to go back into that. I don't want to, even figure this out. I'm done, right? That's basically why I don't play Destiny 2 anymore. So you come into Division 1, and now you've got, level 30, level 40. You've got your SHD, you've got this expertise stuff, You've got optimization stations and crafting stations, and you've got all these various materials and all these different modes and different like extensions of the map that aren't part of the real map that you have to kind of go in by yourself. Like, for a new player, it looks like a freaking mess, right? And then, of course, you add in all the problems with everything else with the gear and everything. The new players, it's just, no, I'm not doing that, right? So, I definitely think that they need to streamline some of this stuff, make some changes, remove the gratuitous amount of shade, put a cap on there. Like 10,000 shade, that's max. That way you can't get these overblown health amounts, and you kind of try to do away with some of this hatred for low shade level players. Because look, if you're a low like you're new to the game, you have a low shade and you can't get into a lot of matchmaking because players kick you, then you're not going to have fun. You're going to want to leave the game. This also extends into the expertise system where, look, I know people didn't get kicked for certain things because it wasn't technically against terms of service, but we can all agree that, having a character at like 2,000 shade and creating a new character in the game who basically you go from 30 to 40, and then you automatically have a new character with 2,000 shade that he can invest into different materials, and then of course spend those materials on various the expertise system or whatever, and you can get expertise 22 on a bunch of gear really quick by cheesing it. And the average player who doesn't do that, who actually plays legitimately, they don't have anywhere near that. Like a lot of players who play legitimately, they're probably still close to expertise 5, expertise 6, 7, 8, and many of them might not even have any investment on a lot of their gear pieces, right? They don't have all those materials, and they didn't farm all those materials, and they're behind a very small portion of people who just boosted this stuff like crazy. And that turns off another huge portion of the player base, because you're like, this is bullcrap. Like, I'm getting kicked because I'm not expertise 22 in this raid. I'm getting kicked because, I'm not shade 10,000 on this raid. Like, all these little things that constantly compound and make life worse for every player. So that, I think, is a big issue that needs to be fixed. Expertise exploits, shade exploits, those need to be fixed, brought down to a reasonable level. And then, of course, the biggest thing I think they need to do is, hopefully the story DLC actually fixes some of this, but a reason to grind again, a reason to farm stuff, a reason to change why they're changing things, right? You need something that's actually like a backbone to the game, because if there's no incentive to do stuff, if there's no real reason to do stuff, it doesn't really encourage the player base to do stuff. You have to look at it in terms of like a whole package, right? Which is why Warlords of New York succeeded. Why? You look at, it offered new gear, it offered new content, a new map, a level increase, and in addition to that, as kind of abused as it is now, it did add that shade system, which, the first, 0 to 1,000 isn't a huge deal breaker, right? Like it's a good thing to work for, and it's fun. Of course, the problems come, once you start factoring in the fact that you get like one health point per shade level, and then you can just have like millions of shade if you farmed it, and that's really where the issue is. But off the bat, when they launched Warlords New York, you had everything to succeed. You had all of that content, all of that gear, a bunch of new changes to the game, and it all felt kind of cohesive and good because it was this big package of things to do and things to explore and things to learn, and that was great because everyone kind of started off on the same foot. It was a reset in essence of the game for everyone. So everyone had to get the new gear, everyone had to get the new levels and make their way through the new map, and that was good because again, it put the entire community into a reset mode. If we don't have another, I guess, reset mode, we're going to be left with these same imbalances, which are going to continue to kill PvP. It doesn't matter what changes they make to the game. If you've got people with 4 million health in PvP, because people are just going to not want to play that. People are going to get sick of it. They're not going to be able to really compete very well because there's going to be that guy with 4 million health who just, swacks the whole team. And again, it's going to have these matchmaking issues because if you're not of the level that we require or we demand, and people can inspect everything, they can see your level, they can see your shade, they can see all this stuff, and they can judge you based on whatever they want, and that hurts the game too. So yeah, I think a across the board reset for the player base in general. Obviously I don't mean like just deleting everything. You don't have to go to level 50. You could stay at level 40, sure, and enjoy what you enjoy. But I think to kind of get the community back to a place where it needs to be, I think there does need to be some sort of progression reset. And I don't like saying it like this because obviously, being a product of Division 1, all my Division 1 veterans can pretty much attest to the world tiers being one of the most annoying things in the division. And that was a player progression reset almost. So if you weren't familiar with what world tiers did, was instead of having like any sort of reasoning behind changing your stuff or changing your progression, what they did was they just decided that, okay, we're going to make a new level of gear that's slightly stronger than your old level of gear. So you are going to farm the exact same content, the exact same stuff, for the exact same reason, and the exact same story, for the exact same gear, just a little bit stronger than what it is currently. And this happened over and over and over again. 5 times that this, progression happened. And it was terrible because for no other reason than just saying, well, we're making stronger gear, it basically just ruined a lot of players' desire to farm stuff because you kept having to refarm the exact same build over and over again, and that sucked. So the mistake that they made was that they didn't include it with other things to actually, give rationale to why they did it. If they had made World Tier 2 and expanded the map with new missions and new modes and stuff like that, great. If they, did the same thing with World Tier 3, where now there's, it's an increased gear score, but you've got new levels, you've got new skills to unlock, you've got new stuff to tackle in the world. Great. But again, when it just comes out one-sided, where they're just adding it just because they literally have no other content for you, they've got nothing else to add to the game, they're just doing it to string you along, that's rough. Like, players do not like that. So I understand why generally the player base doesn't like these kind of like progression increases. But at the same time, if you do it right, it can be a really good tool for the game. And I think that's really kind of where we need to be. We need to have some sort of progression for the game for it to really kind of invigorate the player base and really encourage players to come back and do stuff and offer them new content and new things to do, which is, I hope this is the direction they're moving into. I hope this isn't just like a year 5 and done. I hope this isn't turning into West Side Piers, for example, from Division 1, where that was the last bit of content they released, and then basically without telling anyone the game was done, right? They released West Side Piers and was kind of like, we're not going to do anything else. That was kind of a crappy move by the developers, especially because, like one of the things that they said in one of the State of the Games with Terry Spears was like, well, if you guys want more content for the game, buy these, apparel caches and stuff like that. Support the game by, these microtransactions. And then implying that if people bought these microtransactions, gave them, spent more money on the game, then it would give the developers reasons to continue making content for it. Which, truthfully, they already knew that they weren't going to be doing this because they were already moving on, and it was a dead game. So it was kind of like a D-bag move by Red Storm's part to even say anything like this. Of course, before that, it was, Yannick was saying, obviously it wasn't Yannick's decision, right? It wasn't Yannick's choice. But, in one of the State of the Games, Yannick said something that, like there would never be microtransactions in the game. And this was like at the launch of, towards the launch of Division 1. And then, of course, a few months later, maybe it was a year later, I don't know. Then they all of a sudden added in the apparel cache microtransaction stuff. And it was kind of like the whole player base was like, what the F? So yeah, there's a history of disappointment and anger in the division, and it's not necessarily tied, not all of it's tied to the developers. Some of it is, some of it's tied to their comments, kind of making players angry. But we are where we are. We can hope for the best. Again, hopefully this isn't a West Side Pier situation where there's no content coming after this, because to me it would be really silly that they're adding incursions at this stage of the game, but they're just going to add one and that's really it. Like they added this whole new class of stuff to do, but they're only going to be one of them, and that's it. Like it really does seem to me like they have the intentions to go past year 5. They're just not obviously talking about it yet because it's all up in the air. It's not 100% their decision, but it does. Like to me, what I'm saying is, it looks like they are going about it in the expectation that they will be making content past year 5, as long as Ubisoft and Massive continue to approve of that. So hopefully, Ubisoft keeps the money going, and hopefully they produce good content, and hopefully the DLC is actually like, I don't want to say like hopefully it's like purchasable DLC. I think we'd all love free DLC, but at the same time, if our purchasing of good DLC with Black Diamond leads to the creation of more DLC that's even better, then I'm all for it. This is kind of the thing that I preached about in Division 1, where look, if they release content, I'll buy it if it's good. And if it's good, release more, because I'll buy that stuff too. And this is kind of, like the cycle that I wish, a live service game like The Division is supposed to be would embrace more, because, you release content that's good, you fund your crew for making more content. You give, like that's the whole point, right? You're selling content, not just to give players content, but to keep your jobs, right? So like to be employed, you have to make money. So it's a cycle within a cycle. You make content to keep your job, to make more content to keep your job. And players buy content to have something to do in the game, to, accomplish a goal, to, buy the next DLC, to, it's going to keep going. So I hope that there is something good with the season. I hope that there is an actual plan in place. I hope that they've thought this out. I hope that they're going to bring a lot of good stuff to the game. But yeah, I've got a couple things I kind of want to speculate on in some future videos here, but I don't want to really get into the speculations specifically in this video, because again, I don't want to release something without necessarily saying like this is a full speculation on my part. So this is kind of more just my general opinion on what the seasons or at least what it's looking like, and what I hope they realize when they're doing this content. But anyway, thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.